it's just really good to be like back doing stuff, to be honest, like for so long. So yeah. And also like, I always end up like, I think Kev feels the same, but like, well, you make a record and then you like don't really know what it is, and then you talk about it and it's like, oh shit, that's what it is.
You start to figure it out a wee bit.
Yeah, like honestly, it's a weird thing to say. And like obviously you have ideas of what's going on, but like it is through the conversations you have often afterwards that you're like, oh right, yeah. That was what was going on there.
I suppose because you've been doing the podcast as well, where you sort of unpack the stories behind all the individual songs. How has that kind of changed your understanding or deepened it in any way of the tracks that you've spoken about there?
Yeah, like I think like that's like he's a really good friend of ours. Our old tour manager Danny does that podcast. Really, like it's our podcast, but it's really more of like he's so good at that style of like, I don't know, interviewing and just be like, it's really more like a platform for him to be like, he's a legend. Like we just love that guy to bits. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, like he asks great questions and it definitely helps us figure out what's going on. It's funny. I think, you know, you don't really necessarily talk about everything when you're working on it as a song. You just kind of think of it musically. And then afterwards you kind of think about it more like lyrically or whatever, like, oh shit, yeah, that was going on or whatever. So anyway.
It's funny too though, because this album started with a question, essentially, where you asked yourself, what's the brave thing that we could do?
Yeah. Yeah.
After asking yourself that question and sort of figuring it out over the course of this record, what do you think it means to be brave in music? How would you define that?
What I think we took that to mean, or like what I think when we asked ourselves that question was to just not shy away from talking about difficult stuff, but rather than talk about that stuff and be kind of shy about it. I think for the first time we were like, let's talk about those difficult things. And rather than like those songs necessarily be like, you do it on one song and it's like the intimate track 6 moment or whatever. It's like, do that and celebrate it, like really go for it and boldly present something that feels difficult. It felt like something that was interesting to us. And I think the songwriters at the moment that I think are just so inspired, I don't know, like I love Phoebe Bridgers' records. I mean, I could rattle off too many names right now, but like, I think just for example, with her, like it's that like specificity of what she's talking about, that honesty she has with her own truth, her own story of her life, yet she's not shy about presenting it. It's bold. It's like, and it's, you know, standing there saying like, this is who I am. And hopefully for people listening to that, that makes them feel less isolated in like a society and a world that is seemingly trying to do everything it can to make everyone feel as isolated as humanly possible. So yeah, under the guise of connecting people as well. But yeah, I think that's kind of what our aim was with being, you know, brave, whatever that may mean to different people. But that was how we took it.
That idea, you know, of the fact that it does feel, whether it be through social media or these various sort of platforms on the internet, that we're being more divided and separated by our opinions. Outside of music, what other things do you think can bring us together? I
think like art has a really good role to play in that generally. Like, I don't think it's necessarily just music. I think generally it's art, it's sport, it's things like that are really good for helping to bring people together. Like, I think podcasts have like, I mean, Kev actually originally, like my bandmate Kev is obsessed with podcasts. He like absolutely loves them. He's like wolfing down and he, like we'll be talking and he'll be like, I've been listening to this one. I'm like, how much time? He's also like, he's like the busiest man in music. He like does all these amazing things. I'm like, how does he do it? But when I don't know, like I'm really getting more and more into podcasts as well. And like the more I listen to them and the more you hear people talk transparently and like something, I guess because it's long form, people drop their guard or something and just talk more openly about things that perhaps, I don't know, 5 questions, like, I don't know, traditional means of conversation in that realm are normally somewhat contrived, and podcasts don't feel like that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to a podcast that's say 2 or 3 hours long, it always feels like all the best chat is in the second half of it. Like you have to sort of build to it, if you know what I mean, and get into the zone.
Does that mean that we're in the like ropey first half? Like that? Yeah, I know what you mean though. So true. Like I think just like the dream is that like, I'm kind of what I was saying earlier, like the dream is that it's revelatory for like the people in it as well as the people listening or something. I don't know. Maybe that's ambitious, but like that's kind of, I think that can happen. I've listened to stuff that's been mind blowing.
It's interesting to think about in the context of making an album too, though. You know what we were saying there about how once they sort of get into it, you can unlock something a bit deeper and people let their guard down.
Yeah.
Is there quite a big difference between the first half of making an album and the second half? Each sort of half of that process?
Yeah, definitely. I think like as you get deeper into any like artistic pursuit, it gets harder and harder, I think, to like finish things. And there's like the sort of dream phase of making a record, which is like the first couple of weeks, and the middle phase is just hard work, and then the ending, which is like suddenly these things start coming to life and feeling like, holy shit, this is what people are actually going to get to listen to. And that's pretty magical. So it's kind of like this really naive, magical moment followed by this intensely like, you're really confronting your skills, but also your inability to do things. And it's like really pushing yourself to like deliver something. And then at the end, it's kind of magical as well. But I'd say like relationship wise as well, within the band and with you and the producer, like the depth you're going into by the end of a record it's definitely similar to a podcast, or similar to probably when you're listening to a record, the kind of depth that you go into on like a track 10 versus like a track 1, which sort of opens the door. And a track 10 is sort of like, not like I think of it like you're summing up the record, but like to some extent it's a weird, you kind of want it to be something along those lines, something that encapsulates a feeling from an album.
The other interesting thing is that there are a lot of famous albums or famous songs that have the word blue in it. It's very much a word that has a lot of musical connotations, whether it be Johnny Mitchell, Bob Dylan, Miles Davis. When I say the word blue to you, what does that sort of conjure up musically for you? What does that bring to mind in terms of feeling or what you think the music would sound like?
It brings to mind all of that stuff. Weirdly to me, I think that's something actually I've been like thinking about a lot since making. Wish I thought about it more while making it, but it was like how many songs reference it. You're right. I was like tangled up in blue and like blue, Johnny Mitchell. Like there's so many like relationships, kind of blue, like Miles Davis. Like there's so many relationships people have with this color. That was something I've just become really aware of, that color as well. Like I don't know. Like I've recently become a dad. And my daughter, like, you know, she's 10 months old, but she has like neither me or my partner have blue eyes, and she has blue eyes. And it's like the odds of that are really, there's like, it's like 6% kids with no parent with blue eyes have blue eyes. And I was like, it's just a nuts thing, but it's like little things like I just become really aware of that color being present in my life. But what does it mean to me? I think it's tinged with a sort of nostalgic sadness or something, the color blue, but it's also something intriguing about it. I don't know. There's like a sort of, I think that the idea for the album came from this hotel that Kev and I have both stayed at individually in Morocco called Blue Hours. And it's like a really cool hotel and it's really beautiful. And it's in Essaouira in Morocco, which is like this amazing walled town. It's beautiful, but we both kind of went there just like on like separate holidays to like, and he's like, you got to stay here, it's awesome. So we did, and I loved it, but I more fell in love with the name Blue Hours because it just sounded like as soon as I sort of wrote those two words down, I was like, that's like the name of the album. I know that already. And then I was like, right, okay, why? Like it's like it was the same with Red Earth and Pouring Rain. It was like, it's called that. Like now you got to figure out like why does that matter to you? What is it about that phrase that's setting you off? And then it was like, I kind of sort of almost saw Blue Hours as like a headspace that I get into when I'm working on songs. It's quite a solitary, introspective headspace where I explore stuff that I find really difficult because that's kind of what I'm drawn to when I'm drawn to writing. And so, yeah, that's kind of what Blue Hours, I guess your question is what I was asking myself once we'd established that we wanted to call the album that. It's like, right, like why? Why does that matter? Which seems bizarre, but it's like, it's kind of how it works for me. I like find things really inspiring. Like often I find like a title first and then I'm working back from it.
It's one of those titles too that it feels like it could have existed forever. Like it feels like one of those kind of universal phrases that is just there and you've like plucked it out of the ether. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like that's the thing. It's like it is a phrase. Like it's also like there's like a whole. It is a time of day, like a certain period before like the sun rises fully and all this stuff, and like. But it's not a phrase I'd heard a lot, and I just remember. I mean, it wasn't even the hotel wasn't even called that. It was like in French. So it was called the Blue Hour, Le Bleu, or whatever. Terrible French pronunciation. That's now committed to a podcast. So glad. My apologies to any people listening. But yeah, but that was it. Kind of came from that, really. And then as soon as it was like, oh, Blue Hour, the Blue Hours, it just felt like a headspace I wanted to get into, but at the same time, a headspace that's difficult or something. So there was something interesting in that.
So had you been exploring that headspace before that title attached itself to the album? Did you already call the headspace that before you used it in your music at all?
No, like not really. I think it was more like after staying there, I just remember like I was on the bus at the end of our last tour, so like February 21? No, 20? I can't remember now. God, the years. 20 probably. I can't remember. But yeah, it was the last tour we did before like lockdowns hit and stuff. And I remember saying to Kev, like, I'm thinking Blue Hours, like as a title. And I already kind of knew that I was always drawn to writing songs like late at night. I don't know why. I think it's like a habit from being always living in flats with people and being too self-conscious to write a song and anyone hear you. So it'd always be late at night when hopefully I could just play quietly and no one would hear me.
Sneaking around.
Yeah, sneaking around. Like, arguably that's the most annoying time you could possibly play music if you have flatmates. But for me, that was when I wanted to do it. I don't know, because of that, so many songs like I've written on laptops with just headphones because you're just trying not to wake anyone else up or whatever. But I don't know, I'm just drawn to writing in those. And then I think almost like checking into a hotel as like a way of talking about when you're going to write songs late at night or whatever. Something about that just felt interesting to me. And Kev too, like I remember telling him that and he was just like, I'm in, like, fuck yeah, Blue Hour sounds great. Like, let's go for it. And I think because he'd stayed at that hotel, like I think he could bring his own like vision of what that record meant, what this record could mean to him. Like that's the magic, like the interesting thing is obviously Kev and I are sort of going through such different things in our lives all the time, often really similar as well. I mean, we've both become dads during the pandemic, which is kind of bananas. He brings a whole wealth of different influences and different inspirations to every album we make. And I do too. And that's kind of where the magic is, I think, between our kind of collaborative efforts.
How's fatherhood impacted your music or the way that you sort of view music and the way that it sits in your brain and in the context of your life?
I feel like musically, the main way it's impacted me so far is that I have like all like kid classic songs like Head, Shoulders, Knees and Toes is like on constant rotation in my brain.
Great melodies.
Yeah, I mean, these are hits, I'm telling you. Like, honestly, it's been amazing. Like it's a constant source of inspiration and just I don't know, being a dad has been incredible, like genuinely amazing. It's definitely like it's changed quite a lot in terms of like, I think before writing used to be something that I would take more time over and think about like perhaps more than I'm able to now. But I think that's kind of a good thing. Like, I think actually I was probably guilty of spending too long on this stuff. And actually like I think having a kid just adds focus to your life in a way that only having a kid can. Adds focus, responsibility and exhaustion and joy and love in all of that stuff in ways that you could never predict. And it's incredible. Like it's changed everything and nothing simultaneously. And it's mad. But yeah.
I always think it's one of these crazy things. I guess you're sort of at the beginning of it. Did you say 10 months? 10 months ago. Yeah. But the idea that, as we get older, time starts to speed up and it feels like it's moving quicker.
Yeah.
So for you, it moves at an incredible rate. But for them, because at the beginning of their lives, it's still moving at this sort of slow, stretched out speed.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It is crazy. Like, it is mad. Like, I don't know. It's like we had this thing recently. Oh God, it's mad. But like, she's just started crawling and stuff. And you're like, for ages, we're like trying to get her to crawl. And then as soon as she starts crawling, you're like, oh my God, please stop crawling everywhere. But you're like, It's just mad. Like it seems the stuff seems to take, a while, but then doesn't. And I don't know, like, yeah, my whole concept around time is changing and becoming, as you said, like, I just don't have the time I used to have. But that's, I think, I kind of don't think it's a bad thing. I'm like, it's hard actually. I haven't really like talked about it too much, really. Like, I guess amongst friends I have, but it's just, yeah, like I think it really changes. It's changed so much for me. And it's in a weird way made me appreciate music so much more as well. Like I get to listen to, I put on the Beatles loads and I'm going back to like a really kind of like simple, like not only the Beatles made simple music, but I'm kind of going back to like, what are the first things I want Ava to hear? That's Batua's name, sorry. Like, what are the first things I want her to hear? It's nice to listen to that music again. Like the stuff that perhaps my parents first played me, those sorts of things.
I guess with the Beatles as well, you've got all that sort of Yellow Submarine and the stuff that feels like this proto-Wiggles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like all the Ringo stuff is getting heavy attention.
When you first introduced this album into the world, you did it with All That You Are. That was the first single that you brought out. And yet the first song on the album is New Ways. How do you feel each of those tracks compare as an introduction to this album?
Interesting. New Ways was one of the first things I wrote during the pandemic. All That You Are is one of the oldest songs it's the oldest song on the record. Like we last played that song live like 10 years ago when we were playing an Austin to Boston tour. And that was when we were traveling across America in VW camper vans it was amazing. It was with like Nathaniel Rateliff, Ben Howard, the Staves. But it was just so much fun. Like, I don't know, all the people on that. There was like all the bands, and then there was all the people from Communion. Like, obviously I'm in a band with Kev, but Ben was there too. And it was just really fun. Marcus Haney was an incredible filmmaker, made a film of it.
What's the film called?
The film's called Austin to Boston, and I think it's on Amazon now. I'm not sure. I remember someone saying that they've like recently put it up somewhere. But it was so much fun, and that was our like introduction to touring America, which set the bar perhaps too high for how fun that could be. But like, yeah, just that was the first. So that song's been around for a really long time, but we just have never really known what record to put it on or how to make it work on an album. And I think for some reason, just between what was going on in like our lives, for some reason, All That You Are just kept creeping up as a song that felt right. And we played it to Ian, who produced the album, and he was just like, well, 100% that's like the first songs that I definitely want on the album. And it was weird for us because I think we're often very like dismissive of songs from the past that are like, nah, if it wasn't good enough for that album, it's not good enough for this one. But I think it's also important to recognize that it's not always that a song isn't good enough. It's that the context for that song isn't quite right. But it's funny that you should say that there's something similar between them, because I don't think All That You Are would make it on the album if New Ways wasn't on the album. Because musically, there's some similar stuff going on chordally that weirdly, like I feel like if you just had one song doing that would feel a bit strange, or a bit like you've opened up to a world that you never quite deliver on. There's something weird. I don't even actually know what it is. Kevin probably know. But it's just to do with how the chords are structured. I've written it, but have no idea what I'm doing. But it's like
if you put a gun in the first act of the movie, you need it to go off in the third act. You know what I mean?
It's that principle, basically. Yeah, it's exactly that. So, yeah. So I think, but New Ways was also like, I guess New Ways was about sort of about the pandemic, really. It was like, fuck, like we're going to need to really like have a really like new approach to everything. Everything's changing. Like kind of like who am I without all these things that sort of define me, I guess. Like, who am I without live music? Who am I without making records and all that stuff? Difficult questions to answer for musicians who spend their lives, like, if you're anything like me, perhaps in a state of permanent avoidance of those sorts of questions, or like not even necessarily intentionally. You're just on a tour bus traveling around the world all the time, probably not dealing with stuff. And that song kind of came from that. So I guess it's weird that first song is like that whole world, and then All That You Are is this really old song, but they're somehow connected for us. So yeah, weird one.
That sort of that existential edge, you know, of thinking, who am I without live music? Who am I without this touring and this, and it's defined my life for the last 10 years? Where do you see that most on this album? Where do you feel like you're exploring that most, or where do you see it creeping into the edges of the feeling of it, perhaps?
I think like the shadows and spiders side of things definitely like is exploring that kind of like dealing with perhaps your own mental health, but also the mental health of those closest to you, and the sort of impact of really caring for someone who's really struggling with their mental health, and then also personally just struggling with your own mental health. I think that felt like an important realization for me to talk about that quite explicitly, which I hadn't really done before. I think I've always been more of a like, it's the thing they say with writing, it's like show, don't tell, or something. It's like the idea with writing stuff. And I'm a big believer in that. But I think there's also like, for me, it was a little bit like, perhaps on this record, it was a little bit more like actually just saying that, you know, the chorus of Shadows, for example, just felt like I found it quite empowering to say something difficult, and hopefully in the context of performing live, be able to like add catharsis to it or something. Or like performing live would give it a sense of catharsis that perhaps on its own it feels quite bleak. Or to talk about things that are just difficult, but bravely, I guess, again, going back to that first thing. But yeah, I guess going back to the other theory of like the second half of podcasts when things really get more deep, I think it is kind of true. Like, I think once you get all that you are, I think after that it sort of morphs into a slightly different record that's a bit more, I don't know, somber and reflective maybe. In the beginning it was a bit more like high energy or something. Yeah. How
did Sally's string arrangements that you brought in on that one contribute to that atmosphere, do you think?
She's just like, it was insane working with her. She's just incredible. Like, she adds like an air of serious musical legitimacy to songs that perhaps don't have it without her. But she's incredible. Like, Ian, who produced our album, knows her really well. They worked on stuff for years. So it was a really amazing moment for us to hear her arrangements. And she came in, and as a quartet, they do it and they just perform it. And it's pretty much like a couple takes as a quartet, and they smash it out. And it's just the best thing. It's the best day of recording I've ever had, is just sitting there while this quartet play the most beautiful string arrangements ever, perfectly every single time. And it's really just a question of Ian like changing the levels on one or two of the microphones that are out. But their performance is like perfect. And for me, you know, just getting me to do an acoustic guitar take takes about like, 3 days. So like to see them doing like, it was really beautiful. And yeah, she adds a whole, I don't know, really like, she really got inside what all the songs with strings on it wanted. And like, I had some sort of really dodgy string arrangements from Logic that I'd send, and I was like, please don't judge me. But she was also just kind of like, I get what you're trying to do. And she just took it all to like a level that was so far beyond what either Kev or I could have imagined. So yeah, she's a legend.
That track Shadows too, it was written from the perspective of someone else.
Yeah. So Shadows is written from the perspective of someone who's close to someone struggling with depression, I suppose. Yeah. It's funny. It doesn't, in my mind, I'm not sure if there's a specific relationship that I'm thinking of. The more I've thought about it since, the more I've gone like, I was definitely exploring my own personal mental health on songs like Spiders, but then I think Shadows was like a little bit alluding to like growing up. My mum suffered from depression when I was younger, and I don't think she ever really got it sort of diagnosed or anything, but she did, and so did my dad actually. And I think I spent a lot of my like childhood trying to cheer them up and stuff, and just being around people that were struggling. And I think, and even as I get older, I've definitely had friends who struggled with mental health as well. And I think being a friend of someone struggling is often, is very difficult as well. And I think I just wanted to write a song about that. I wanted to write about that experience from my perspective, in the hope that anyone who's going through that with a friend of theirs is sort of, doesn't feel quite so alone with it as well, because it can be really lonely when you really care about someone who can't see any reason to care about themselves. That's really difficult to sort of process. So it's really important to like talk, basically. And as a songwriter, I guess it's my job to like not shy away from that stuff, perhaps. Don't know.
It's like that line you have, I think, is it in Spiders, where you talk about wanting someone to know the person that you once knew.
Yeah.
This idea of depression being this all-consuming thing and trying to get back to where someone once was.
Yeah, that's it for me. I think that's so much of like, I think that's quite like maybe it's a slightly nostalgic thing as well, to like remember people in a way, and then when they're not that way, it feels really difficult. But yeah, I think that's a lot of what that, it's funny, like I was listening, the Staves record came out during the pandemic, and I remember thinking it was fucking like insanely good. Like I think those girls are just like well, they are like the coolest and funniest like group of people in the world, but they're also just like ridiculously talented and ridiculously good songwriters. And like I think there's this one song where I think Millie may have written the words, I'm not sure, but she says like, I used to be magic. It was like one of the lyrics, and I was like, oh, that's such a good like line. I could really relate to it. And I think in my head, I was like, when I was working on Shadows, there's a line that's like, I still remember all your magic, even if you don't. And I think that to me was like, I wouldn't have written that line if she hadn't written that line. But it's not like, just like I remember just being really inspired by it and thinking it was so cool. And I could relate to the feeling of that lyric so well. And it kind of inspired me to write that lyric. But it's kind of going back to what you're saying, that like that person that someone once was, clinging on to that.
It's such a huge thing as well to try and condense down into a 3-minute song or any piece of art, really, to be honest.
Yeah, like, I don't know. That's the thing. Like, that's the thing, perhaps why I find it like podcasts and things help you realize what you're even trying to do, is because it's such a mess of emotions and feelings when you're writing it, that you're trying to distill it into something considered. But it's like, even when you do that, it's like, it's still, you're not really fully sure until you kind of talk about it, and then you like have to look at it in different ways and stuff.
I watched Melancholia the other day. Have you ever seen that? The film?
No.
It's a great film about depression. It takes place on the day or a couple of days before the world ends, where this massive planet called Melancholia is going to collide with the world, and it focuses on this like intimate story at a wedding where the bride is suffering from depression. And as the planet gets closer and closer to colliding with Earth, she almost gets more relaxed and complacent with the fate, whereas everyone else around her is sort of panicking and stressing out about the fact that the world's going to end. But
wow, yeah, that's nuts.
Pretty great stuff.
That's amazing. That reminds me a little bit of like, I remember reading an article with Robin Pecknold from Sweet Foxes, I think, was saying like during the pandemic, in a weird way, his anxiety got better. And I think that is true for some people who are struggling with like, particularly anxiety that I think is brought on by like a lot of social interaction. I think like in a weird way, like not having to go out and feel like they need to be places all the time and be around people all the time, like help people go like
social pressures removed.
Yeah, like, and I think they exist, I think hopefully we will have like a deeper like understanding and empathy for that. But like, I think definitely some people, that's really hard. And I think it was really interesting to hear him say like, actually, like I think creatively for him, it was like, for me, I found creatively quite difficult when the pandemic hit. Because I was just like, I think in a way I've always dreamed of having more time to write songs, but actually when the world stops, it's like, no, this isn't inspiring at all. You need like tap out of a world that's still moving is quite inspiring. But if the world stops, it's like, there's nothing there. But I think for other people, it was like, actually, like I can really exhale now and feel like almost like I can slow down time and life a little bit, and that's helping or helpful to them. I don't know.
Back to this idea of time being very distorted.
Yeah, time, man, right back. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting, isn't it? They have like concepts of time feel bizarre right now.
It's funny you were saying about how the Staves inspired that lyric, because is it Gratitude as well? It was inspired by catalogue of unabashed gratitude.
Yeah. I got obsessed with that book. I don't know, something about like that song in particular. It's just like, I mean, there's something about that. It's like a book of poems. It's just ridiculously amazing. But the writer, Ross Gay, I think is his name. He's literally amazing. But yeah, like the way he like frames difficult stuff in that book is just it's really magical to me, and it really helped me with like stuff I was finding difficult. I don't know, just being thankful for difficult stuff in your life because it's difficult because you care about them. Like that is like a fundamental thing. It's like this sucks because you give enough of a shit about it for it to suck. Like that's a good thing that you care about stuff like that. And the alternative is you don't give a shit about anything and you don't care about anything. And that's way worse. And I think, yeah, in that book of poems, he's like, which I'm not like someone sitting around reading poetry all the time. I actually don't really remember how I came across it, but I absolutely I loved it. Like in a way that I don't normally love contemporary poems and stuff. I don't know. It's rare for me to really fall hard for that stuff, but that book is amazing.
What were your intentions with that song? Were you trying to write something that had a similar feel to it, or were you just trying to bounce off some of the ideas in the book? Or
I was trying to. I think the first line, it's a form of gratitude. Like the idea that I was finding it really hard to write stuff, and I think often when you find it hard to write something, or you find it hard to like text someone, or you find it hard to like do anything or communicate, it's because there's so much you want to say, and there's so many difficult things there that you don't know how to say them or do them. But that again, it kind of comes back to like, well, why? Like, and I think that was where I was coming from. And it was like, for me, it was like going, it's a form of gratitude that when I think of you or when I try and write anything, all of that stuff feels really difficult because I care so much about you. And I think that was sort of like, it was like an admission of like good, it was an admission of all the really good feelings beneath a lot of really difficult feelings. And I think that was kind of interesting to me, just as a concept, and it kind of all came from his book, really. So yeah, I think from then on, it kind of becomes a story about trying to cling on. We're going back to it, trying to cling on to who someone once was, but like trying to find a memory of someone that stays kind it's like the lyric from that song that I think is the most, I guess, the point of the song, but trying to find a memory of someone where it made sense before it got difficult and before it got too difficult to like make it work or whatever. I think exploring that to me was, yeah, that guy's book basically did that. Really it just kind of opened the door for like a whole like, these are like perhaps some of the feelings you're experiencing. And that's kind of, I don't know, it's like, I feel like most of the time when I'm working on songs, I feel like I'm in conversation with other things. So like whether that's a lyric by the Staves or a poem by this guy or a film I've seen recently, it's like I kind of keep almost like all of these things just give you permission to feel things and understand yourself a bit better. And I think if I can be part of that conversation and just keep offering other ways of talking about stuff or channels, like to open up for other people as well, that's like the dream. Like I don't know if I'm successful in that, but it's like if there's any chance that I can do that, that's what I'm trying to do.
I guess that's kind of all our culture though, isn't it? It's just people riffing off of each other's influences and ideas and kind of creating something new from a different collection of them.
Absolutely. That's like, that's 100% like what I'm doing all the time. Like but it's nuts, isn't it? Like I kind of didn't really think about the Staves thing. And then I heard it and I was like, oh my God, that's totally where I've nicked that sort of idea from, has come from that. Like, but yeah, bizarre. It's bizarre how it works. You know, like, I don't know. It's interesting to me. I love all that stuff.
We get a name check for Bears Den in that one as well, Gratitude. You use the words Bears Den in the song.
Yeah.
Is that the first time you've used the words Bears Den in the song? I was trying to think. Yeah.
It is, yeah. I've never it talks about like a story like that, like that's Bears Den is like the town next to where my grandparents lived. They lived in
Glasgow.
Milgate is where my grandparents used to live. They used to live in a place called Balderna, which is like a farm. They ran a farm basically there, and my mum grew up there, and my uncle still lives there actually. So Glasgow, like both of my parents are from Glasgow, so I'm like Scotland. You know, I've got a lot of love and a lot of time. So yeah, I spent a lot of my childhood in Scotland as well. Like every holiday was just like going up to see my grandparents in various different places in Scotland. So yeah, but I think there's these caves in Bears Den, basically, that my mum used to like take us to when we were really little, and they're like really amazing. But and she always used to like, I remember like chatting to her, she'd always light up, but she talked about them. And I think that song is kind of all about that sort of memory as a kid, and then trying to cling on to those memories when that actual relationship becomes much more difficult down the line. But I think on some fundamental level, it's just like being nostalgic for being a kid as well. But yeah, like that is a name check for Bears Den. And I guess like, I didn't really realize it when I was writing, choosing the band name. I was working in this barn that my uncle let me stay at. This like derelict barn I was staying in pretty much, that was around in Milgai. And I came back from it with like 5 songs and was like, I think we should start a band and it should be called Bears Den. And didn't really think of why or how. And I was like, well, it's probably because the town next door to where I was writing all these songs was called Bears Den. And then like now it's like, and then I'm kind of, as I do it for longer, it's like, I don't know, that story kind of came back to me as well. And I don't know. It
almost becomes like, in the way that we were talking about riffing off of other artists, you're almost then riffing off yourself and riffing off your own past. Yeah,
I think so. I think that's something that's, a bit of a different one, like a bit of a, being self-referential or whatever is a bit of a strange thing, but like feels like weird to do that in music for some reason. But like, there's another song on the album that I feel like it's a bit like that. Oh yeah, there's a song we had ages ago called Stubborn Beast, and it's not like a massive thing, but there's a lyric in the album which is like, what's one more burden on the back of this beast? And I was like, that's related somehow to that song. I don't know, like, and it just felt, I guess I kind of like that. For fans, I suppose, as well, I like the idea that the more you invest in like a band or whatever, the more, I don't know, you can tap into the sort of, I'm obsessed with bands where there's almost like a mythology around them, and like, I like that stuff. And the more you invest in the lyrics, the more you invest in stuff, the more you get out of it, I guess.
Yeah, it comes back to what we were saying about music bringing people together. It's that idea of community, that once you pick up on these little things, then you speak to other people who have picked up on them too, and it's this sense of togetherness.
That's it, man. That is 100% it. And like, fundamentally, if anything we can do that helps that sort of thing, is just, it's the best, most rewarding thing in the world.
There was a quote from you I picked up on an interview, but it was like 10 years ago or something. But you spoke about the fact that you felt like Bears Den was a live band, first and foremost. Is that still the case now, do you think?
Quite good. Yeah, interesting. Like, I think, yes. And I think we've missed it so much. And I think playing live is a massive part of what we do. I think also, like, I think it's a lot of different things. Like, I think I'm learning that now more and more. I think I'm starting to like see the separate parts of the band more clearly, perhaps because of the pandemic. Like the sort of writing phase, the recording phase, and the touring phase feel like, perhaps for so long it's all felt like one thing, but I think it's kind of become more like separate entities. And like, I think Kev and I are both like learning more and more about recording the more we make albums, which is really exciting. And then also on another level, it's like the writing, I feel like I'm going deeper into that, which feels really exciting too. But yeah, fundamentally, I do see us as a live band. And like, we've actually got our first rehearsals on Friday of this week coming up for the new album. And I'm like, I can't even imagine actually just being in a room as like a 6, like with the sessions and with like the crew and everyone just like actually working through this stuff. I can't imagine it. So like, yeah, I'm just so excited. And to play to a room of people, like, I haven't even got that far. I'm too excited about just like playing a guitar next to like 5 other people, let alone to people who are listening. So yeah, buzzing.
What was the most cathartic moment you had making this record?
When you make albums, like, you're not sure which ones are going to work, like which songs are going to work and which ones aren't. And I think with Ian, he was really good at whittling down what's going to work and what's not. At one point, we were only going to do 8 songs, and then, but we weren't sure whether it was like a mini album or an album. And then All the Wrong Places was like not going to make it, and then it did, and I'm really glad it did. And I think there's a real catharsis to that moment. There's also like a bridge section which was originally just strings, and then like right at the last minute, I like wrote some words, sang them at home and sent them over to Ian, and they made it. And it was just like, I think that was probably the most cathartic moment, because I knew it was the last track and it was just this hole in the song for like the whole time, and finishing that felt like, yeah, now this album's done. I don't know. There's too many cathartic moments, really, but that was one of them for me.
It's been a pleasure again, man.
Dude, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, always interesting. Again, probably.
Yeah, lovely chat. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like I know stuff I didn't know about the record before. Yeah, I really appreciate it.